Welcome back to Real Estate Uncensored, everybody. This is Matt Johnson. We are here without Greg. He is sadly not in the co-pilot seat where he so belongs. But as always, this is still the place where you get actionable ideas, insight, and inspiration to turn your real estate career into a life of freedom. And we're back with Chris Bentley, who you might remember from a previous episode. He's a realtor based in Dallas. He's been named twice as the Realtor of the Year by D Magazine. And so we're going to jump back in with him. We're talking a little about his marketing strategy. If you look back at his previous episode, we go into kind of his background and what he's done to brand himself. But I want to go into some specifics. So first of all, Chris, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Super stoked to talk about this because one of the big turnarounds for you when you came out of that period that we talked about in the last episode of really kind of remaking your business is you decided to go deep into content and branding. So one of the things that you did is you've written a couple of books, one for buyers and one for sellers. So take me back. Before those books existed, what got you interested in that even as an idea?
I wanted to write a book about what's kind of floating in my head. And first-time homebuyers, just, there's all kinds of just garbage that goes around about what they can and can't do. Some people have to put down 20%. You have to have stellar credit. You have to, I've heard it all. And it's mostly from their parents. Their parents are been in the home for 30 years and that's how they rolled. And that's, back in those days, you did have to put 20% down, but not today. So I put that out and I was just kind of trying to get it out of my brain and onto paper, which just sounds a lot more difficult than what it is. Or it sounds really difficult.
Yeah, I was going to say, it does sound difficult. And most people look at the idea of writing a book and it just are automatically overwhelmed. It sounds like a great idea, but it's something that, well, that's not something I do. That's something other people do. People who have time. I don't have time. So of course you didn't have time either. You're fixing your business and you're getting out of, massive lead generation spending and kind of rebuilding your business from the ground up. So tell me a little bit about what that process was like. How did you get the stuff out of your head and just onto paper?
I just thought about it enough. Like I spent probably about 2 weeks kind of like in my head, how am I going to do it? How am I going to do it? And then for some reason, one day I was at a bar just kind of hanging out and a guy was there and he was writing a book as well. And I kind of talked to him about like, how did you start? Because that's the hardest part, just kind of like starting because you have the idea, just getting it on the paper. And then he was like, oh, I just kind of did this and this, but like, I don't know if it's ever going to be published because it's, a godly amount of pages. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I just went home and I was like, I'm going to just like turn off my phone and just work and like get it out of my head and into it. And once you get kind of like the skeleton structure, you can kind of just go back and add the meat to the bones kind of deal. So it's a very process of doing it. I don't know if it's the right process. I just kind of did it myself. I'm sure there's like a better process, but that's kind of how I do it.
Okay. And what, out of that process, so a couple of weeks of just, good old fashioned hard work, what did you come out of that with? Like how big are these books that we're talking about or how small are they?
They're not very many pages. The first one I think I did was like 7 pages and it's progressively gotten longer as I add more content to it and what I think. And then of course, like I put it into my version of like, if I was directly speaking to you, not like this is our book and this is English class. This is more like, hey, this is how to do it. And it's sort of like a little more direct. So once I got that out and out of my system, I was like, okay, cool. Like I got this now. And then as I've kind of learned by talking to other authors, it's kind of the same thing with them. Like once they get the first one out, they're like, okay, great. Now I can write like a second and a third and it's not as hard. And it's actually more detailed than the first one.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And for anybody that remembers the interview with Ray Wood, so he has sold something like, I think it's 30,000, maybe even 50,000 copies of his book, which is basically how to sell a home for, the highest top dollar in the shortest amount of time. It's aimed to the general public. It's for listing consultations. So not only because he sold it, he brought one to everyone. He sold boxes of them whenever he goes speak, but then he also licensed it to a bunch of other agents, and every time they gave away or whatever, like they would buy the rights to essentially republish his book and change out some of the content and release it as their own. So that's all kind of lumped into there. And so, but he started off the same way. You just get the stuff out of your head. You don't worry about how big or long it is or whatever. Get it out of your head. One quick way to do that I'll suggest is for anyone who has a structured listing presentation, you could easily just have that recorded and sent off and transcribed, and bam, the next thing you know is you got a book, right? Everybody, like anyone who knows how to deliver a structured listing presentation has a book inside of them. You just don't know it, right? Because it's all the same things you would love to show up and have the client already have read. It's your listing presentation, right? But to me, that's one of the shortcut ways. If somebody wanted to kind of emulate your approach, it's actually not as hard as you think to get something like that produced. So you started off with a 7-page thing that got all of your initial stuff out of your head, and then now you've expanded on it. Tell me a little bit about how those books are used, either in social media, or are you delivering them in advance before you show up to a listing presentation? Tell me a little bit about how you leverage them.
When I first started selling the books, I mean, you just gave me a great idea that I'm just sitting here like in my head thinking about it, with licensing it out. I just, I would just give it away to people, to anybody who asked, and I still do. I mean,
Yeah, of course.
good, like I'm not really worried about the $9 that you charge on Amazon. It's just for looks, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I would just every time I do it now, anybody that's like, if I get a listing lead, I give them my book about listings. If I give them somebody that's looking to purchase a home, I give them that book. And it's a quick read so that they don't feel like overwhelmed with a huge book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a way of like credibility more than anything. Because when the people go onto my site, they'll be like, oh, wow, he's written some books. And like most realtors never, ever even, written a blog, let alone a book.
Yeah.
Albeit it's only 7 or 9 pages, but it's just something that nobody else has done. So it's just a lot of credibility that I like doing. People are like, oh wow, this guy's like really doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And to me, that solves a lot of problems, right? It just having that credibility thing. So to me, there's a couple of different ways to solve like objections that come up in appointments, and one of them is by handling it with the words that you say. Right. And that's one way. Those are traditional objection handlers, and there's nothing wrong with those. But then there's another way to handle them, which is to destroy that objection before it ever comes up. Right. And something like a book does that a lot for your credibility. Right. So if you're relatively new to the business, or if you're like, let's say, entering a new market, for example, like you're going from selling a lot of new construction into traditional, or you've sold, $250,000 homes and you want to double or triple that price, one of the easiest things that you can do is write a book about how to get luxury properties marketed and sold, right? Relatively easy, because somebody's going to assume that if you wrote a book about it, you know how to do it, right? So you'll never get it'll completely stop that objection from coming up like, hey, like how many luxury properties have you sold? Like you just hand them the book. It just annihilates that before it ever comes up. So now granted, it'd be nice if you have some experience before that, but you could literally do an interview book of just nothing but you interviewing other people, and you can still say, I wrote the book on how to get luxury properties sold. It's still true.
Yeah. It's definitely a good way to do it.
So I love that approach. So tell me a little bit about, so when you have a listing appointment come up, how is that book like getting into their hands? Is it emailed in PDF form? Is it printed out and delivered, hand delivered? Is it FedEx? Like, what do you do?
I just email it, and it's just attached to the CMA or market analysis that I do on the property. Just a lot of times it'll be somebody that already knows me, and they'll be like, hey, I reached out to you before about it. Like, now I'm ready. And I'm like, cool. Like, here's a cool book about how to do it, have at it, and it's real basic stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that people really don't, spend any time on, like curb appeal, and you try to go sell a house and there's no grass. And I'm like, come on, guys, like the grass is brown. Like,
Yes.
can we throw some paint on it? Something, so
That's right.
just, you got to have some sort of curb appeal. Like nobody wants to go from a long day at work and then pull into a house where the grass is brown.
That's right. That's right. Spray paint that at least with like silver and blue. Like put a Dallas Cowboy star or something in the yard. It'll do something. That's fun.
Something.
All right. So Chris, how can people connect? How do they learn more about you?
Chris D as in danger Bentley .com. Chris D Bentley on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the above. I'm not really too involved in Snapchat, but I do have an account there.
Mhm.
Good old fashioned email as well.
Yeah. Awesome. And people should go back and listen to your previous episode where we dug a little bit more into your background. We talked about how you were basically on the verge of bankruptcy and, like way overextended yourself buying leads, and how you completely shifted and rebuilt the business from the ground up to go into branding and social media, which is why we're talking about the books, because that fit into that whole strategy. But people should go back and listen to the original episode where we dug more into kind of the overall story and the arc of where you've been, because that was phenomenal. And then for anybody who's interested in kind of on the same journey that you're on, Chris, where you're hiring people, you're starting to build your team, you're bringing on some admin support and some other agents to work your leads. If people are on that same journey, check out Wise Hire. They are great supporters of the show. We love using them. Greg is using them right now for sales reps for the radio show that he runs in Northern California. He's gotten 300 and some applications, but what Wise Hire does is it matches all of them to the disc assessment and then weeds out all the people you shouldn't be talking to, right? So it basically skims the cream of the crop right off the top. So you only talk to the very small percentage who match up right to that profile that you're looking for that specific position. It also has job ad templates, so you can really get your ads out there and up and running quickly and start generating candidates that you can start having conversations with. So like I said, check out Wise Hire. That's super easy to find, wisehire.com. They are great supporters of the show. And then make sure to subscribe and rate and review the show and all that good stuff on places like Apple Podcasts and iTunes and Spotify and stuff like that. We'd appreciate it. And if you like a certain guest episode, like if you like the episode today with Chris, make sure to give Chris a shout out in the rating or the review that you write, just to thank him for his time and his contribution. So with that being said, Chris, appreciate it. This was super fun.
Thank you. A pleasure being on.
Absolutely.